Okay, Boker Tov, good morning, everybody. So we are working our way through Masechet Beitza, second parak, Daf Yud Zayin Amud Bet. Before we jump into the Gemara today, let's look a little bit at Halacha, a bit of the Shulchan Aruch. We had a few questions yesterday about some of the practicalities of Eruv Tavshilin and the things that we discussed. And as you'll see in this, the Shulchan Aruch has a very long siman dealing with Eruv Tavshilin. This is in the end of Hilchot Yom Tov. You'll see over here, this is, let me just get it on my screen without everything else in the way. Okay, so the Siman Taf Kuf Kaf Zayin, as you can see, which is quite a lengthy Siman. I was going through all the details, and you'll see the Siman provide, a lot of the Siman discusses what happens to somebody who has not made an Eruv Tavshilin, and what can they do, and how do they get around that? So just to answer a couple of specific questions that we spoke about yesterday, have a look here at Sif Zayin. Sif Zayin, the Shulchan Aruch tells us, this is all, of course, based on our Gemara. Mitzvah kol adam na'arev. Every person has their own mitzvah to make the Eruv. Right? The Gedol Ha'ir, the Rav of the city, has to make the Eruv for everybody. But if, as we've already seen this in the Gemara, but if everybody has to make their own Eruv, why does the Rav have to make the Eruv for everybody else? Kadesh yismoch alav mi sheshachach o ne'anas. Okay, somebody forgot. Somebody had an honest. Somebody had unforeseen circumstances. Somebody had the Eruv and got lost. Okay, interestingly, we add in here the Rama, or somebody else who doesn't know how to make the Eruv. Right? There's an interesting question here, which the Mefashim discuss. What if we understand somebody who forgot, and we'll talk about how many times you can forget in just a moment. But what about somebody who doesn't know how to make an Eruv? Can they lekatchila say, I got my email, it said Eruv Tavshilin. I have no idea what the Eruv Tavshilin is. Can't I just say, okay, rely lekatchila on the fact that the Rav is doing it? Some say yes, some say no, lekatchila. But he has what to rely on here. But so the Shulchan Aruch continues. So somebody who had the opportunity, who had the possibility to make the Eruv and did not do it. Okay, again, I'm not talking about somebody who doesn't know how. Somebody who knows how. Somebody has the time. Somebody wrote, I saw the message. I know what the Eruv Tavshilin is. And I say, okay, I'm not going to do it anyway. Nikra poshea ve'no yotzei. So such an individual is called a poshea. And they are not yotzei through that Eruv. So we saw the story of Shmuel in the Gemara. We said if a person forgot once, but if they forgot twice, all right, then they're already called a poshea. So the question is, what does this mean if you forget twice? So Mishnah Berurah says like this. He says, Nikra poshea, mipnei shetakanat chachamim haya, shekol echad ve'echad yaseh eruv tavshilin ba'atzmo. The takana was each person needs to make their own, or each household needs to make their own Eruv Tavshilin. Right? Husband and wife don't need to make separate Eruv Tavshilin, one for the household. Right? The reason is so that we remember that from Yom Tov to Shabbat you can't cook, and all the more so from Yom Tov to Chol. Could be a person does not necessarily have to do it themselves. I appointed a shaliach to do it for me. Okay. Nami, the shlucho shel adam k'moto. It means you have to make your own. Don't rely on the one of the Rav. It's not at the time when you're making the Eruv that you know. It's only afterwards when it's announced, okay, there's an Eruv Tavshilin if anybody forgot. By the way, this comes up actually a practical question in terms of who can make the Eruv. Let's say we said this year in Chutz La'aretz you have the 3 sets of 3-day Yom Tovs. They're going to be making Eruv Tavshilin for Sukkot. They're going to be making Eruv Tavshilin for Simchat Torah Shmini Atzeret as well. If a person who's a Ben Eretz Yisrael is visiting in Chutz La'aretz, right? So we always say this because question that comes up very, very often. Somebody who lives in Eretz Yisrael, they're in Chutz La'aretz. So we say that in practical terms, you have to keep Chumrei Makom She'yatza Misham, Chumrei Makom She'alach Lesham, Yom Tov Sheni. We don't allow one to do Melacha, right? Not in Paresia and not in Tzina either. Again, unless there are particular extenuating circumstances. But generally speaking, We say a Ben Israel who's visiting in Chutz La'aretz should not do melacha on the second day of Yom Tov. One exception to the rule is that you're allowed to cook without an eruv tavshilin, because right, cooking, which is permitted on Yom Tov, but you don't actually need the eruv tavshilin. And what goes along with this is that a Ben Eretz Yisrael should not make the eruv tavshilin when the second day of Yom Tov is on a Friday, because he's not actually obligated in it. So you go, you're staying with your parents, you're staying with your kids, you're staying with whoever, and they live in Chutz La'aretz and say, oh, will you help us out? We make the eruv. You got to say, no, you've got to do it yourself because you're not actually obligated. Okay, the next says in the show.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
how about a Ben Chutz La'aretz who is in Israel and is keeping 2 days? He has to make an erev tavshilin for Sukkot and Shmini and Simchas Torah, right?
A Ben Chutz La'aretz is in Israel. If he's keeping 2 days, so
he's keeping.
Yes, if he wants to cook for himself and he wants to prepare, then he would need an erev tavshilin. That's correct. Yeah.
Well, so a Ben Eretz Yisrael can't make for him, right?
Yeah. But meaning again, a Ben Eretz Yisrael. So we can get into a discussion. Can he ask the Ben Eretz Yisrael to do melacha for him on the second day or whatever? But meaning, if the Ben Eretz Yisrael cooked food, then you're allowed to
he can eat the food
for Shabbos without the eruv, for example. Yeah, he can eat that. That's no issue. Right.
Can he ask people to do things for him?
Okay, so that's that we're getting into whole sugya. I would say, yeah, in terms of actual melacha, probably better not to. But there is what's right. We have there's a Magen Avraham that talks about when somebody accepts early Shabbos. We spoke about this once in the past. Mm-hmm. And this is Meforash in the halacha that if I accept Shabbat early, and there's somebody else, right, it's not yet Shkia, and there's somebody else who's not yet accepted Shabbat, I'm allowed to ask them to perform melacha for me because they aren't obligated in anything yet. So the question is, then there's a few different reasons as to why that is. The question is, would that apply in the same way to Yom Tov Sheni? The truth is it probably wouldn't. I'd say as a default, as a lekatchila, there we should be, if somebody is keeping 2 days, somebody is a bona fide Ben Chutz La'aretz, so then better not to. Yeah.
Okay. And as far as the Erev Shabbos business, when asking a Jewish person to do malacha, that's also true. You can ask a non-Jewish person to do malacha for you.
At that time, that would be yeah. Okay. So Kafav in the Mishnah Berurah says, "Ve'nei yotzei bo she'en chachamim maknim eruvam lemi shehu yachol lasot be'atzmo mitatzel." Meaning the intention was when the Gedolei is making the eruv, it's not for somebody who can do it themselves and is just lazy. There are those who argue. ולדידו יכול כל אדם לסמוך לכתחילה על עירוב של גדול העיר, ואף הגדולים מכוונים בעירובן להקנות לכל אדם בכל אופן. Right, so this is what I said before. This is exactly the machloket. That there are those who say that if a person, not that a person forgot, but a person intends to rely on the eruv of the Gedol HaEir, so okay. And who is the one who's not Yotzei? ואיזה שאינו יוצא בעירובם? זה שכל פעם עושה בעצמו ואינו רוצה לסמוך על עירוב של הגדול. Okay, so we have here a machloket achronim. One opinion says, no, I always have to make my own eruv tavshilin v'zeh, and if I don't make it, then I can't be Yotzei. Another opinion says, no, I can intend to rely on the one of the Gedol HaEir, of the Rav, who's the one who cannot rely on that, and somebody who never makes an eruv tavshilin, and they're called a posha. Okay, so that is the machloket. Yeah, he says the end of the day, b'diavad yesh yismocha poskim en la'akel mishum simchat yom tov. B'diavad would probably be maker because of simchat yom tov. Now we want to understand what is the definition of a posheya, somebody who, according to everybody, cannot rely on the eruv of the Gedol HaEir. We said he forgot twice. So let me just read you the Piskei Tshuvot. He says like this. Kol ze b'pam harishon, aval im b'regel hasheni shachach od pam. Right. So the first time you forgot, beseder, you can rely on the eruv of the Rabbi Kenigsberg. The second time, havei keposheya ve'no yotzei be'eruv shel Gedol HaEir. You're not yotzei. So what does it mean the second time? In other words, let's say this year, let's take this example in Chutz La'aretz. Somebody forgot to make the Erev before Rosh Hashanah, and then they forgot before Sukkot. So that's 2 in a row. Avalim avar regel achad, or it can be the much further spaced apart, but it's 2 in a row on which an Erev Tavshilin is required. Avalim avar regel achad sheniach Erev Tavshilin, v'shuv higia regel samuch l'Shabbat v'shachach laniach, ein dino kepusha. Right? He says, but if you forgot to make the Erev Tavshilin, and then the next time you did make the Erev Tavshilin, okay, so then it resets. Then the next time it's considered like the first time. That's one opinion. Second opinion, yesh holkin, v'sovrin shebeshachach shnei pa'amim afilu einam l'tzofim dino kepusha. There are those who say, no, if you forgot twice forever, then that's enough. That is, okay, that's a little bit more of an extreme, more stringent view. And listen to this, there is now a third view, which says completely the opposite. It says, there are those who are far more lenient for Kotvim, shebizmanenu, shatilda rabba. This was written in the Aruch HaShulchan about 100, maybe more than 100 years ago. It says that nowadays, there is lots of tirdot, we have lots of things on our minds. What would you say today, right? There's always a lot to do before Yom Tov. You have lists, the pre-Yom Tov list. In the days of the Gemara, I don't think they had a pre-Yom Tov list. They just had what they had to do. But we're so busy. You know what I'm talking about. You all seen the checklists, right? They go around on WhatsApp with the emails. You have the checklist, what to do before Chag. Okay. So very interesting. There are those who say that even though the Gemara said if you forgot twice, that's enough. That was in the days of the Gemara when they weren't so busy. But nowadays you're so busy, you forget. Everybody can forget. I wonder if you would say, when not only are we so busy, but we have so many reminders, it's actually much harder to forget nowadays. So I don't know. I'm not sure that this is the accepted Psak L'Maaseh, but I think the middle ground seems to be if somebody forgot once and then they remembered again, so then it sort of resets. And I think B'diavad would have what to rely on in terms of Simchat Yom Tov. Okay, so that was one issue that came up. Another one that came up, I think this is right at the end of the Siman. Back in the Shulchan Aruch, he says, what happens in Mavar b'meizid or b'shogeg u'b'shel kama k'derot shelo l'tzorech Yom Tov? Right, we discussed this yesterday. We saw the proofs back and forth in the Gemara. If somebody cooked now b'meizid or b'shogeg, but if they cooked b'meizid and they cooked on right, not for the sake of Yom Tov, for the sake of Shabbat, I guess, but they didn't have the Eruv. He says, Mutar lochlan b'Shabbat u'b'chol. Says, B'diavad, you can actually benefit from that. Says the Bir Halacha, something very interesting here. He says, Mi ura'oi lekonsol lefirot enei Beit Din ma she'asa. Says, actually, it's fitting to give this person a knas, and the Beit Din needs to, ask your local rabbi what, dependent on the circumstances, what one should do. Okay, there's a whole discussion here about harama, etc. The Shulchan Aruch goes into very many details. Again, we won't go through all of them, but that was just there's just a little bit of a little bit of the halacha which comes out from our Gemara. Okay, so let's go back into the Gemara now. We were nearly finished this section before we get to a Mishnah which talks about a completely different topic. So we saw, let's just go through the last bit we saw yesterday. So we're about a little bit past halfway down the Amud on Yud Zayin Amud Bet, right? We just mentioned that in our Mishnah, again, we saw Beit Shammai Amrim Shnei Tavshilin. Beit Shammai said you need 2 cooked foods, and Beit Hillel said it's enough with 1, but Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel both agree that if you have the fish with the egg that's on top of it that you're cooking, that's considered 2 cooked foods. So now, said Gemara, Matnitin de lo ki aitana. That was our Mishnah, which is not like the Tana of this Braita, which says, the Tanya Amar Bishim ben Elazar, Modim Beit Shammai uBeit Hillel al Shnei Tavshilin shetzarich. That according to this Braita, we say Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel agree that you need 2 cooked foods for your Eruv. So what's the machloket? Al dagu beitzah she'alav, with the fish and the egg that's on it. In our Mishnah, that was exactly the point of agreement. Yeah, it's the point of disagreement. That that's what they were talking about when Beit Shammai says that's 2 tavshilin and Beit Hillel says that's 1 tavshil. But unlike the Mishnah, which says that that's what they say you need, according to the Braita, both say that you actually need 2 tavshilim for the Eruv. So what else? What do they agree about? According to the Braita, it says shavin she'im pilpel beitzav v'natan letoch hadag, or she'ilsei kaflutot v'natan letoch hadag she'en shnei tavshilin. Okay, the egg and the fish, that's going to be considered like one thing, or one or two, that's machloket. But if you kind of have the stuffing in the food, you take this egg and you mash it up and you cook it with the fish, or you have these vegetables that you crush up and you're essentially stuffing the fish with them, that would be considered, you're cooking Moroccan fish or whatever. And you have the fish and you have the vegetables together. That is considered two. That's considered two cooked foods. Okay, Jonathan's happy that we mentioned Moroccan fish. Okay, good. So I don't think that's what the Gemara was talking about, but never mind. They ate different types of fish back then. Okay, so Amar Rava Hilchatake Ketana Didan Valiba de Beit Hillel. Rava says the halacha follows our Tana. I followed the Mishnah and we follow Beit Hillel. So again, according to Beit Hillel, you only need one tavshil, but it's not so simple. Have a look at Tosfot. Tosfot Raviyah that says Amar Rava Hilchata Ketan Didan V'Aliba de Beit Hillel. Says Piresh Rashi V'Aliba de Beit Hillel de Kamal Tavshil Echad. Says this means that we follow Beit Hillel that you only need one tavshil, one cooked food. That's your eruv. So said Rashi. V'Omer Rabbeinu Tam de la'afiyah tzarich larev gam b'pat. Okay. Rabbeinu Tam says it's not so simple. It says if you want to cook, then it's enough with one cooked food. But if you want to bake, then you need to have bread as part of your eruv as well. Ve'no yachol la'afot al eruv tavshil. Bring on the Bach, right? He says da kaimalan tzorich echad. Sorry, the Bach he raises that word echad, right, which seems to make more sense. They know yachol le'afot al eruv tavshil. Says you can't bake if your eruv is just a cooked food. Da kaimalan kal bi Eliezer, da ma'en ofin ela la'afoi ven vashlin ela mvushal midaka maiti stama digma kvatei le'el. Okay, he says Rabbeinu Tam. We saw earlier on in the Gemara there was an opinion of. This is going back to on the previous stuff, but there was an opinion of Rabbi Eliezer who said that the eruv has to be only for baked goods to bake and only cooked goods to cook. And he says that Stam the Gemara goes like that. It doesn't argue against him, so therefore we hold like that opinion. Now the problem with that is that we saw in our Amud that this was a machloket between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai. You remember, right? We saw this yesterday. That Beit Hillel says no, it's fine, and Beit Shammai says no, you need it's only that way. So he says, so how do we resolve that? Well, I'm telling you now that Lacha follows Rabbi Eliezer. We can't go against Beit Hillel and follow Beit Shammai. So he says, as Tosfot, V'ha the Kamri Beit Hillel le'el, that which we see above here on our the Beit Hillel says, Meniach Adam eruv tavshil echad v'oseh bo kol tzolko, right? That a person can take one eruv and do everything. He says, Kai amayta kama Beit Shammai en tumnin et hachamin elam ken hayu lo chamin tmunin mibod yom. וסבו את אפילו בשלושה תבשילין, צריך שלכל אחד ואחד כנגדו, אז זה כמה מבית הלל. In other words, Beit Shammai said you need three different types of things for your eruv. You need cooked foods to cook, you need baked foods to bake, and you need insulated foods in order to do hatmana. He says about hatmana, that's what Beit Hillel was arguing, right? תבשיל אחד עושה בו קוצרו, כלומר, כל מיני תבשילין, כגון חמין וכיוצא בו. In other words, says Rabbeinu Tam, that Beit Hillel is not arguing on the fact that you need separate foods to cook and to bake. It's only for chamin, for hatmana. Now, a little bit later on in Tosfot, that is all the opinion of Rabbeinu Tam. But another one about Tosfot disagrees. If you look a few lines later, it says, "V'lo nehira la'Rav Rav Yitzchak." He says, I don't agree with this. This doesn't make sense. First of all, the Pashtot Lashon of the Gemara makes it sound like Beit Hillel saying, he says, Tavshil Echad. You have Tavshil Echad, you have one cooked food, and that's enough. And Beit Hillel and the Mishnah say, you only need one Tavshil. Whether it's to bake, whether it's to cook, etc. El asmachta ba'alma ma'it el elvei tavshilin. No, what Rabbi Eliezer says there was bringing you a proof about the concept of eruv tavshilin, not to tell you that the halacha follows him. And the adraba came on Rabbi Yeshua. לגבי רבי אליעזר משום רבי אליעזר שמותי ורבי יהושע פליג עליהם וירושלמי ומה אופינו מבשלים מבושל. Okay, Rabbi Yeshua argues with Rabbi Eliezer and the Yerushalmi. Rabbi Yeshua says, no, ofinu muvashlin, you can bake and you can cook based on the tavshil that you have in the eruv tavshilin. And we know that generally speaking, we don't paskin like Rabbi Eliezer anyway, and certainly if we have Rabbi Yeshua who's arguing with him. Okay, but bottom line is, says Tosfot at the end, Mikol makom ameri, lo mla'ani libi lavo adivrei dodi. He says, at the end of the day, we don't just go and make up halacha ourselves. Says Ri, my uncle Rabbeinu Tam, he held this way. Who are we to come and argue with Rabbeinu Tam? So he says, at the end of the day, I think that everything Rabbeinu Tam is saying is wrong, and I think that the Gemara proves the other way around. But halacha lamaaseh, I don't want to go outright against him, and therefore tzarich shnei tavshilin pat v'tavshil. Therefore, it's best, even though meikar adin, and we would rely on it b'diavad, that we could say you could have a tavshil and you could use that to cook and to bake. Nonetheless, the best is you should have pat v'tavshil. You should have a baked food and a cooked food. V'chein amad davar. Says Tosfot, right? That's the greatest proof of all. Chein amad davar. That is the minhag. That is what people do, and that's the way it has to be. Okay. So that is why we say, lekatchila, when you take the eruv tavshilin, even though you actually only need one tavshil, you take your egg or your fish or your schnitzel, whatever you want, and you take your roll together and you put them, and that's the eruv. It's not a big deal. It's not something difficult. Maybe where do we find? Balei Tosfot, Rishonim, Achronim argue with each other all the time. All the time they argue with each other, and all the time they say halachas this way, no halachas that way. So maybe sometimes when it's incompatible, and one says you do this, one says you don't do this. Okay, so if I think I have different svara, I can't. It's not compatible with the other opinion. Yeah, okay, you're going to add in a baked good to your eruv tavshilin. It's not such a big deal, and therefore better to be choshesh for the opinion of Rabbeinu Tam as well. Okay, let's just finish the Gemara. The Gemara now says, but the Torah says achalo or shabad harei ze lo yivashal alav. We said if you had now eaten the eruv on Yom Tov, you should eat the eruv on Shabbos. But if you had eaten the eruv on Yom Tov, or it got lost, so now is the time when you want to cook, but you don't have the eruv, so therefore you can't cook. Okay, so Amar Abaye, naktinan, hitchil beisatov v'ne'achal eluvo gomer. Says Abaye, what if it got lost in the middle, right? You started baking, you've got your dough, you're kneading your dough, you're in the middle of the process, you've started, and now the eruv, halfway through, you say, oh, by the way, where's the eruv? And it's gone lost. So no, you started, you can finish. Right, it says Rashi there, he says, you started preparing the dough, and to bake it, eruv, or through using the eruv. Okay, so that concludes our discussion for the moment about eruv tavshilin. We're at the very bottom of the Amud now, we're onto a new Mishnah. Let's start in the Mishnah. And the Mishnah now talks about something completely different. Again, we're going through different machlokot between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, just like we saw there with eruv. Yeah, it's related to a different aspect of Yom Tov. And this Mishnah is going to talk about tefillah, tefillat kelim and tefillat adam on Yom Tov. Now, when we talk about tefillat kelim, we have to remember, what are kelim? Nowadays, we think of tefillat kelim, of your pots and your pans and whatever. And that's certainly true. That is one element. Again, the tefillat kelim that we do nowadays is the tefillah from when you purchase from a non-Jew, and then it needs to go into needs to have tefillah. But there is another type of tefillah which is related to Tumah and Tahara. And there, it's not just your pots and your pans, but kelim in Chazal. The word kelim often means any types of vessels, types of utensils, can refer to clothes very often. Okay, it's going to be important for us to remember that your clothes were tamei, or a person was tamei, and the clothes they were wearing, and they have to go and they have to tovel them in the mikveh. So it's important to mention that, because without that we aren't going to understand the Gemara. Because we talk about kelim, sometimes we're going to talk about laundering, or we're going to talk about squeezing them out and squeezing out the water. You're not squeezing out the water from your aluminium pots and pans, right? But that's something else. So the Mishnah says like this: it's Chal Yot Achar Shabbat. Let's say you have Yom Tov that falls after Shabbat. Why does all of this come up in the first place? Because we have halacha. The Gemara in Rosh Hashanah says that a person should go and have tefillah, go and do tefillah before the regel. before the now question nowadays, is that still required? Right? We don't actually have dinei tuman ta'ara. We're not going on aliyah regel, so certainly not to the same extent. Rashi says, Rashi says milifnei Shabbat kaimalan b'Rosh Hashanah. Chayav adam l'tayer et atzmo b'regel. Person needs to be towel when it comes into the regel. Dichtiv v'nivratam lo nigau. Mukina b'regel kach yatbil me'erev Shabbat asur latbil b'Shabbat v'Yom Tov. Okay, so a person would go in erev Yom Tov and they would go to the mikveh. The question is going to be, what happens when erev Yom Tov is Shabbat, right? Which is going to happen this year on Pesach, if I'm not mistaken. Right? Erev Pesach Aliyot b'Shabbat. That has its own very, very interesting complications and discussions, and don't worry, we will get there. I remember a couple of years ago, the last time this happened, somebody called me up before Rosh Hashanah, and they said, Rabbi, I'm looking at the calendar, and I see that Erev Pesach is on Shabbat. What do we do about B'dikat Chametz? I said, can we just get through Rosh Hashanah first, and then we'll talk about Pesach. You've got time. So don't worry, we have time. We have good time to, I know people get very stressed about these things because maybe it's unusual and it's less common, but better. We'll get through it. Okay. So right now we have Yom Kippur to worry about, and then Sukkot. Eventually, we'll get to Pesach. But in any event, the point is, so Chal Liot Achar Shabbat. You have Yom Tov, which is after Shabbat. So when do you go to the mikveh? Beit Shammai Omrim Apilenta Kol Lifnei Shabbat. Beit Shammai says there is no tefillah on Shabbat. It has to be before. When they say Hakol, what does it mean? Hakol says Rashi Apilenta Kol Kol Atzarech Tefillah Bein Adam Bein Kelim. Whether it's Adam, whether it's Kelim, that needs to be before Shabbat. Beit Hillel Omrim Kelim milifnei Shabbat, ve'adam b'Shabbat. Okay, Beit Hillel say no. Beit Hillel say the kelim has to be before Shabbat. Okay, and the Gemara is going to discuss why is it that the kelim can't go to the mikvah on Shabbat. Ve'adam b'Shabbat. But a person can go and toivel on Shabbat itself. Okay, this is also a very, very interesting discussion nowadays. Can a person go into the mikveh on Shabbat? Can it go on Yom Tov? Okay, it also has relevance for a question which comes up. We didn't discuss this year, but a question which a lot are discussing, particularly in Chutz La'aretz, is about showering on Yom Tov. Okay, would a person be allowed to shower on Yom Tov in hot water, in cold water, etc.? We do find that there is later on. This is not obviously the Mishnah here says a person can go to the mikveh on Shabbat. We have to discuss. But we find later on in the Achronim there is a minhag not to go to the mikveh, not to go even to wash in cold water on Shabbat, because of various concerns, some of which we will discuss in our Gemara to come. But let's stop there for now. I want to wish everybody a Gemara Chatima Tova. Wish all Chag Sameach, because that's coming up. If you remember last year, we had unforeseen circumstances, and it took a long time before we could resume the share. So Bezrat Hashem, we should know good things, we should know B'sor Tovot, we should be in a normal situation, as normal as can be, and hope to resume very, very soon after Yom Tov.
Amen.